Hello and welcome to another swoon-worthy conversation. I'm Danika Bloom, and today I'm talking to Sarah Neeson. Sarah is a professional editor who's got 15 years of experience, and she's also a published editor of, as of today, 8 romance and fantasy novels. Now, the funny thing is, Sarah's career began in the financial sector editing complex documents, which is how my career in the not-for-profit sector ended with 10 years doing financial literacy work. So it's kind of fun that we have that. I don't meet very many other people who worked with credit unions and with banks writing financial stuff. But that work that Sarah did really helped her hone her eye for precision. And now Sarah specializes in proofreading manuscripts, yay, fiction manuscripts specifically, to get them ready for the final polish before publication. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Hello. So I want to start with an interesting little fact. We get to see this in the community a little bit. We get to see this. You've shared pictures. You have 4 goats. Not
I
many people
do.
have 1 goat, let alone 4.
Yeah, I have four. So I started with Angora goats. I have two of them, so I shear them every 6 months or so and then collect their fleece. But two goats does not a herd make, so I ended up with two others just for fun. Yeah, and they are, interestingly, all named after authors. So I have Jane Austen, Bram Stoker, Louisa May Alcott, and Mary Shelley.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. Okay, and your dog is about the size of a goat.
He's bigger than the goats. The goats are all a little bit on the smaller size. We call him the size of a horse, actually. So he's about 150 pounds, and his name is Book, but
Book.
that's from a show that I liked. There's a
That's
character
funny.
named Shepherd Book, and Book is a type of shepherd, so I thought it was fitting.
That is fun. And then you also have 2 humans in your house, which just is a lot.
Yes.
It's a
Two
lot in
humans
one,
and two cats.
and 2 cats.
Yeah, so there's a few of us kicking around on this property.
All right, now actually it's kind of funny. You also write under 2 pen names. So clearly you're not afraid of taking on big jobs because writing under 2 pen names is something that a lot of people are like, no, I can't do that. Do you feel like Sarah Neeson and SP Neeson, who is your fantasy author persona, do you feel like they're different sides of your personality, or what made you decide to use 2 pen names?
It was mostly a business decision because I read extensively in both genres. And so I write it in both genres. It's just how it happens. And I decided I wasn't going to limit myself to one because then I would feel closed in. And as such, I started with SP publishing fantasy, and then I had this sudden brainstorm of an idea for a contemporary rom-com. And I actually wrote the first draft of that almost in 1 month. Yeah, so I decided to do two pen names to keep them separate for the different audiences, but to connect the two pen names so that if somebody is interested in both, they can easily find both names. As for if they are different sides of my personality, maybe. I know that Sarah writes primarily light and fluffy stuff, whereas SP writes a little bit grittier stuff.
You mentioned that you had an idea to do a rom-com while you were writing your fantasy. What's been like, have you had other aha moments as an author? Would you consider that an aha moment?
Yeah, I think the biggest aha moment I had, and somebody else said it better than any way that I could say it. I heard Elizabeth Boyle once say that you learn more from finishing one book than you do from writing t or starting 10. And after I finished my first book, which is Truth in the Smoke, when I finished it, it took me about 4 years to write that book. And then the second book I wrote in 2 months. So it was a light bulb where, and I can't really explain what it was that I learned. It's just sort of this weird feeling that, okay, now I understand how it works to get from the beginning to the end, and now I can do it again.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the biggest thing was figuring out how to get to the end of the book was a very interesting and a very interesting learning curve for me.
I think that's a pretty common experience. I can speak for my own first manuscript that I finished took me years as well. And then I got to the end and I did had it developmental edited and I didn't ultimately publish it. But the next one, I finished my first draft in the first 50,000 during a NaNoWriMo competition and got
Mhm.
that one done relatively quickly in a number of months. But again, I'm not sure what it is other than possibly we figure out it's possible. That part of our brain that for all that time is going, oh, maybe you're not good enough, maybe you can't do this. Suddenly, like, you can do this. So your brain can now be
Mhm.
saying, you can do this, you've done this, and it really wasn't that hard overall. So yeah, I love that aha.
I also learned a lot more about my writing process in doing it that way, or in finishing that book. One of the things that I say about my writing process, if people are a gamer, they might have heard this term. It's called fog of war, and it's when your character in the game sits in a map and the whole map is fogged out, and the further you go into the map, the more clear it becomes. And that's how I write. I don't necessarily know where I'm going, but as I go through, it suddenly becomes more and more clear. And so once I kind of understood that about myself and how I can get from A to B, which is the beginning to the end of the book, now I can do it again. And I can be confident in the fact that it's okay for me to not know where I'm going because I know that when I get there, I'll be like, ah, this is where I was going all along.
I love that. I'm not a gamer and I have not heard of fog of war, but I love that metaphor. That makes perfect sense to me.
Mhm.
But I want to come back to romance writing, and tropes. I love talking about tropes. Seems tropes are kind of a really popular conversation in the romance world in the last year or two, where I didn't hear so much talk about tropes back in 2019, 2020. But what do you have a trope that you secretly love to write, but that you haven't yet tackled?
Yes. So I love enemies to lovers, and I will eat those books up so quickly. I have not written an enemies to lovers, and every time I think I'm going to write one, it turns out to not be a true enemies to lovers. What I've been writing a lot of lately is Grumpy Sunshine and Reverse Grumpy Sunshine. I just love the dichotomy of the two characters, and that's as close as I've gotten to enemies to lovers. But it is in my head to have a couple of those kinds of books in the future. For now, I think I've got like about 17 projects that are in my head right now, so we'll see when I get to one. But yeah.
I'm so envious of brains like yours. My brain is a single focus story, and I can't think of the next one until that one's done. That's just the way mine works. Um, so you have launched a proofreading and formatting service for specifically for romance authors, because I know you've been doing proofreading. I've known you now for, are we
6 years.
going on like since 2020 or before 2020?
It was 2020. Yep.
And I know you've been doing proofreading with fiction authors since then, and it's
Yep.
longer than that, right? Since
So I've been proofreading for fiction authors since about 2020. I've been proofreading and formatting documents since 2010.
since
Yeah,
2010.
that's when I started working in the financial sector. I basically actually, I hadn't graduated. It was a work placement through my program that I was doing in professional writing. And I got a job with a financial institution in their policies and procedures department. And so that's where I worked for 10 years. And I did a lot of proofreading and formatting and some publishing and other stuff.
So what's inspired you to launch this business now that you're also a romance author?
Part of it is I just feel like it's the right time. I was actually having a conversation with my husband the other day, and I was like, this is something that I'd really like to do, but I don't know how to do it. And he's like, "Don't you know a whole lot of people who are authors? Why don't you ask them?" I was like, "That's a really good point."
So wait, to
You-
be clear, the part you didn't know how to do was launch your own business because you knew how to do the work. Is that
I,
right?
I know how to do the work. I don't know how to find clients. And he's like, "Well, you know a whole lot of people who know a whole lot of people." And I said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, you're right. I do know a whole lot of people who I can talk to about this." Yeah, so I guess part of the reason is because I've built up this community of authors, and I can see that this is something that I know how to do, that I can help people with, and I love helping people with doing this. I actually have a volunteer group that I'm part of, and I'm going to be formatting a book for them in the fall. And I just was very excited that I could do this. I was like, why don't I try to do this for other people as well?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of where the light bulb kind of turned on for me to actually launch this as a business.
I love that you get to include your husband in a positive way conversation because so often we romance authors are like, "Oh my goodness, keep the husband out of my business." So that brings me joy.
Yeah.
Okay, so thinking about the formatting piece as someone who's been through the publishing process many times. So of your books, your 7 published titles, they're all indie
Eight.
published. What's one thing that you wish you had known about book formatting before you indie published your very first or your second books?
So it's not really something that I wish I knew mo before because, like I said, before I started publishing novels, I was working and doing this stuff. But it's something that's been reinforced, and it's how late you should be formatting. Because one thing that I notice for myself, I really want to get to the formatting part, and then I format it, and then I'm like, now I need to make some more changes, and it doesn't make any sense. And it is something that I actually, when I was working with writers through in the financial sector as well, they would give us the work, and they're like, here, it's all done. And then I would do my job, and then they'd come back and say, actually, more changes. And I'm like, please stop doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's how late in the process formatting and proofreading should take place because it doesn't make sense to do it early because then you just need to do it again.
I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, authors and the people that you worked with were asking for the formatting before the documents were proofread?
So they would ask what they wanted versus what they were asking were two different things.
Oh,
So what they wanted was for us to clean up the document so that they continue making changes. But what they asked for was to basically format and proofread the document as though it's time to publish it, and then they take it back and do more changes. So that's what happened then. Now, working like with novels, it's more that you proofread it and then you format it, and then you're going to look at it again before it's published. I don't have one next to me, but I always get the author copy,
the
um,
paperback
the
version.
the paperback proof copy from Amazon before I publish, so that I can read through it to make sure that there's no problems with the formatted copy. One thing that I noticed when I published the romance was the scene break that I had put in was way too big. And so I was really glad when I had gotten the proof copy beforehand to notice that before I went ahead to publish. A friend of mine did not do that final, very close proofread, and what she noticed later on was her page numbering was wrong. And
Oh,
it was something that happened on the back end of the program that she was using to format. So it wasn't anything that she had done. It was just the program messed up something. And somebody who she knows pointed it out that the page numbering was incorrect. So those are things that happen after the formatting stage during a final proofread, which is one of the things that I am looking forward to catching those because they slip through. You don't notice them.
I think a lot of people don't understand what the proofread is,
Hmm.
right? The proofread is, like you were saying, you've got the paperback or the final formatted ebook,
Yeah.
and it is the proof.
Yeah.
And that's what that gets read so that you can catch weird word breaks. Sometimes, words get hyphenated or broken where they shouldn't, depending on how
Yeah.
the setup is. And
And that's, I think, another thing. So I've been thinking for a long time. I've been using Atticus to format my own books. And one of the things that I don't like about Atticus is when it breaks words in awkward places or it breaks pages. Like it does have a widow and orphan control button that you can turn on, but I find even with it turned on, it doesn't always work great, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to switch. I've used a program called InDesign in the past, and you have a lot more control over what's going on when you use a program like InDesign versus Atticus or Vellum, where you basically just put it in and the program does the work for you. It's a little bit more complicated to do the work yourself, but then you can be guaranteed to have those breaks happen in good spots.
the other thing I understand using InDesign, something I have never done, is you've got a lot more creative control with inserting, different scene breaks or, chapter page breaks that have more interesting graphics and other
Oh
things
yeah.
that can make the book just more visually appealing, right?
Absolutely. You basically have complete control, which is something that I have learned about myself is I am a bit of a control freak and I like
That's what
to have
we want
control.
in someone who's a proofreader and a formatter, someone who wants all that, because that means your attention to detail is so honed.
Yeah.
Um, do you have any pet peeves when you're working with romance novels around formatting them?
Around formatting them specifically, not really. Yes, I changed my mind. When you give me a document, a lot of people don't know the difference between a hard return and a soft return. A hard return is where you just hit the return button and it moves to the next line. Soft return is where you shift and return. And when you do that, it messes things up. It was actually when I was working at the financial institution, I primarily worked in Microsoft Word because that's just the program we used. And I remember a writer had come to look over my shoulder at this project we were working on together. And he looked at my screen and he completely freaked out. He's like, "What's wrong with your Word?" And it was because I had turned on something called Pilcrows. So I can see where the spaces are, where the hard returns are, if we've used a soft return or not, because it messes up the formatting.
Yeah.
And I just always work with Pilcrows turned on. If I don't have it turned on, to me, it now looks kind of weird and blank. I like to see where the spaces are. It's just a weird thing that I've kind of learned to do. So yeah, that is definitely a huge pet peeve is if somebody gives me I'm not going to say anything because I'm going to explain the difference for people to know. I'm still going to work on the project, but it is kind of funny when I get those things and people will say, "I don't know what's going wrong with my formatting." And I'm like, "Well, did you use a soft return?"
And they
Because
probably don't even know what a soft return is, right?
most of the time they don't.
One of my earliest mentors does a couple of things, and we worked together for a number of years and on many projects. She uses N dashes. She'll use, instead of putting an M dash, she does N dash space, which makes my brain explode. And the other thing is a double space between sentences. And so we co-wrote a couple of books, and it was just like I just had to adapt to the fact that I was
Mhm.
going to be changing all of those things because it's just so ingrained in her brain to do it that way. So
Yeah.
I can
I think
relate.
the other thing is inconsistencies. Like what you were saying about the N dash. I have an author who I work with. She's one of my critique partners. And when she does an ellipsis, she puts no spaces on either side of the ellipsis. When I do an ellipsis, I have it's like goes word, no space, ellipsis, space. And I don't mind that because she's consistent. Throughout her entire document, she always does it the same. And I'm like, hey, that's different from me, and that's okay as long as you're consistently doing it. And I think that's the thing that is another thing that a proofreader is going to look for is have you done this thing consistently through your entire document? Because when you don't, that's when people kind of get tripped up. when they're reading.
Yeah. Now, as a proofreader, do you create any kind of a style guide or do you ask them for a style guide? How does that piece work?
It depends. If the person has a style guide already, like my critique partner, she's already written a few books, and so she has one. Whereas if somebody's brand new and they don't have one, then it's something that I'm absolutely happy to help create. I have one myself because it's important to make sure that we're remembering. And then like certain spellings, I'm Canadian, so I use Canadian spelling. My friend is American, so she uses American spelling, except she does not like the word gray. So
So she uses
she uses
Canadian
the
or British
Canadian
spelling.
gray and everything else is American. And I'm like,
That's funny.
U's are pretty cool letters. I'm just saying.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a Canadian and in my romance, I use American spelling only because I didn't want to deal with the readers who were telling me I was spelling things wrong because
Hmm.
I had that with my very first novel that I published. It was with Canadian spelling. And I can't tell you how many reviews said it was great, but for the spelling mistakes, I'm like, curse you.
I do have an author's note at the beginning of my books that says this is a Canadian book written by a Canadian author, so you will see some Canadian spelling.
Yeah, that's what I did with my nonfiction. It's we love you in Canada. Yeah,
We sure do.
yeah. All right. Okay, what's your best piece of advice that you can give a debut romance author who's feeling overwhelmed by the whole publishing process?
There are a lot of steps, but each step by itself is pretty straightforward. So just take it one step at a time. Think about the next thing you need to do and do that thing, and don't worry about everything else. It will all come together. Just try to see the trees for the forest.
Very good advice. Very, very, very good advice. All right. So, for someone who's thinking, yes, I need somebody to do a proofread. Oh, and you know what just occurred to me? We as authors can, or we as readers, not we as authors, will recognize a book that hasn't been proofread, especially now that authors are relying more on brainstorming buddies who are not human,
Hmm.
because people are accidentally leaving their brainstorming buddies prompts
Comments?
in their books. They're like, you should have hired a proofreader. That wouldn't have
Yeah.
happened. Do you have any hilarious proofreading horror stories, either from your own books or from others that you've worked on?
So, back when I was working with the financial institutions, there were two that I can think of that were absolutely funny. One of them, instead of saying acts of God, it said acts of gold.
Whoa, that's a
And,
good one.
and then the other one, instead of saying self-administered credit unions, it said elf-administered credit unions. And I could just picture these little elves administering the credit union.
I love, you know what you just reminded me of? One of my very first jobs in the nonprofit sector was working for a man who's still doing this work 30 years later. And he's the fundraiser for lots of big Canadian nonprofit organizations and many international ones. But we were writing a fundraising copy for the David Suzuki Foundation, which is an environmental organization in Canada, based in British Columbia. And I was new there. I was also new to British Columbia from Quebec. And it was one of those form letters, so it wasn't addressed to the individual because it was the kind that goes out to prospects as opposed to donors already. And it said, "Dear British Columbian," but Columbian was not spelled as British Columbia. And that went out to like 10,000 people. British people from Colombia, the country
Yeah,
of Colombia. That
those
was my
are
biggest public mistake, and I was not fired for that. But yeah,
those are the hardest things to pick up and things that I miss in my own books, not in others because obviously I'm very close with my own work. Is words that are words.
yeah,
Like gold is a perfectly acceptable word. It doesn't
as
work
is
in
elf.
this context. Same with elf, same with Columbia. it's just, you know, you need to be careful when you're reading that you're using the correct word and that you didn't leave off a letter or add a letter unnecessarily, or that you used
Transpose
the
letters.
man. Um, Often I find that I've used one of those two in my work and it's the wrong one because it looks very close. And so when you're just reading quickly, you're going to skip over it because your brain tells you this is a word and it's thinking what the word should be. So your brain kind of just uses that. It's something that I've talked about because I'm just helping my 6-year-old learn to read right now. At a certain point, you stop reading the letters and you start reading the words, and your brain just chooses the right word for the sentence. So that's why when you're proofreading, you have to go slowly to make sure you catch those times when it's the wrong word.
Indeed. Elf managed financial services. I want that. And I want
So do I.
acts of gold as well.
I would love some acts of gold.
Yeah, me too. Okay. But please send them to British Columbia, not to that
Yes.
other place, because you'll never find me over in that other one. So, how should people get in touch with you if they would like to get either proofreading or formatting services or just talk to you about what that might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So my email address is 18streeteditorial@gmail.com. My website is also 18streeteditorial.com. You can find a contact page on that website. So that's where I'm at. And then, of course, the Swoonworthy Services website.
Yep.
So a bunch of different places.
All right. Well, it was so fun to talk to you. I'm looking forward to your next book, and
Yes,
I will
I'm
see.
aiming for fall of 25 for that one.
Yeah, great. Okay. Thanks so much, Sarah. We'll see you around. Bye.
Bye.